So in this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about stance for stick mechanics and where you want to start. Um, Footwork is everything, and where your stance is and having a good power base to shoot from is going to make a huge difference in how you deliver your shots. As always, there is no one right way to do this. This is the way I do it. This is the way I teach it. There are a lot of bad ways to do even footwork. This is one that I found that is, again, kind enough to your body. And one of the things about the footwork that I use is I tend to point my toes directly at my target, or at least generally in that direction, because I feel that gives me better lateral motion. It's easier for me to move side to side. It's easier for me to move on a 45-degree angles off of that as well, as opposed to the classic fencing stance or the Taekwondo back stance like this. This is more appropriate for a lunge, but I feel it doesn't really give me as much motion laterally. So I tend to point my toes at my target. And the way you're going to find your stance is you're going to stand with your feet shoulder width apart, just comfortably, just as you would if you were walking. And then what we're going to do is I always teach stick mechanics with shield leg forward. And the reason I do that is because it's just a little easier to learn those mechanics with the shield foot forward, because with your hand attached to your sword shoulder, your hand is here, your shoulder's here, it goes down to this hip. This is what is going to give us the rotation to get stick rotation to be able to deliver a blow. It's easier to learn that with a shield leg forward position. Eventually, I use both my feet interchangeably, right leg lead, left leg lead, either one depending on the situation that I'm fighting in. But for understanding what the stick mechanics are, it's easiest to have this side of your hip back to be able to deliver a shot. So what we're going to do is we're just going to take a half step forward with your shield foot. So what this gives us, and on this line right here, if you can see it this way a little bit better, as I take this step here, what's going to happen is I'm going to have essentially the heel of my shield foot lined up with the toe of my sword foot. So the stance that you need to take is really not much bigger than that. Anything wider than this is going to compromise the amount of hip rotation that you have going out, and it's going to overall it's going to impact your balance. So we're going to take a half step forward with the shield foot. Then what we're going to do is we're going to bend our knees slightly to find what is often referred to as a balance positive weight distribution. So if my feet are shoulder width apart and I have my weight evenly distributed between the balls of my feet and my heels, this is what we refer to as a balance neutral position. I'll see if I can do it from the side and maybe you can see it better. So as I lean back into this, as I lean back on my heels, this is what we call balance negative. And you can see I can only go so far back before I start falling. And then if I rotate back again to balance positive or balance neutral, and then I'm going to lean forward just a little bit, and that's going to give me a balance positive. And you can see again, there's only so far I can go in a balance positive stance before I start falling over. But that's what we're looking for. As we take this half step forward with the shield foot, so that the toe of the sword foot is lined up with the heel of the shield foot, I'm going to bend my knees slightly to give myself a balance positive position. The reason for this is all of our blows are going forward. Everything has to go forward. So in order for me to throw a blow, if I'm on my heels to begin with, I have to rotate to the balls of my feet to deliver something anyway. So if that's where I have to be to deliver a blow, I'm going to start there to begin with. But generally speaking, that puts me in a position where I am always more likely to strike at my opponent, and I'm always in a better position to throw a blow than I am simply to defend in it. So that comes from having, and it is just an offset. You don't want to be so far over that you're over your knees. You just want to have a balance positive. It's just a slight offset forward so that all of your blows are going forward. So the next thing in getting a good proper stance comes with, so it is, the next thing is going to be the hip rotation. Okay, as I discussed in previous videos, I use hip rotation to generate motion, to get the stick moving. An object in motion tends to stay in motion, an object at rest tends to stay at rest. We need to get the stick moving as efficiently as possible. I do that with hip rotation rather than pulling down on my arm to do it, rather than using core muscles as some others do. That's fine. That's not how I do it. I use hip rotation to do that. And so as we're thinking about where this stance is going to be, if I'm standing square here and I take this step forward, the first thing that this does is it makes it so that this side of my hip is further back from this side of my hip, which gives me room to drive that hip. And you'll see my sword is just kind of offline right there. As I bend my knees slightly to get that balanced positive stance, the next thing that happens is my hip set actually cocks back just a little bit. And it's like pulling a hammer back on a pistol, where there's almost more tension holding it back than it is to let it go. And what we're looking for as we're doing that, when we have this offset here, the amount of hip rotation that we're looking for to start the shot is just enough to make your hips square again. We don't want to over rotate this way, and it's a hip rotation where I'm driving the hip this way and I'm driving it in a straight line this way. If you can think about it as my hip set being around a pole like the stick here, I want this kind of action going around it. I'm just going to pivot right around that pole. So I'm going to drive here to be able to get that. And again, the amount of rotation that I need is just enough to make my hips square, because all I'm doing is I'm using that hip rotation to generate motion. I'm using that to get the stick moving in the first place. So just like that. So that's the basics of stance. It's just a half step forward, bend your knees slightly, get the hip set back, and then as you do that rotation, you're just going to square your hips. So I think that's all I'm going to do on the footwork or on the stance and hip rotation for now.